Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In just under 2 hours' time, President Trump is due to announce his decision on whether he's going to pull America out of the global deal to tackle climate change. If he does, it will be honouring one of his key campaign pledges, describing climate change as a hoax and an American job killer. Today, China said it would stick by its commitments under what's called the Paris Agreement. Our science editor, David Shukman, looks at what effect an American withdrawal would have on the world's first deal to cut global warming.
With new records for temperatures being set around the world, and scientists saying that more warming will threaten the ice sheets, the challenge is to cut the greenhouse gases heating the atmosphere. The Paris Agreement, negotiated in December 2015, is the world's first attempt to tackle climate change, and the UN hopes it will survive whatever America does.
Independently of the decision of the American government, it's important that all other governments stay the course. The Paris Agreement is essential for our collective future.
Under the Paris Agreement, countries pledge to cut their emissions of carbon dioxide. The aim, to limit the rise in global average temperature to 2 degrees, with the promise of $100 billion a year for poor countries to cope with the effects. But Mr. Trump has long been opposed.
We're going to cancel the Paris Climate Agreement.
He says it undermines jobs, and he once claimed global warming was invented by the Chinese. Donald Trump says he's been hearing arguments from both sides. So what are his options? Stay in the Paris Agreement, but demand a review of the US role. Leave it, which means a notice period of 4 years, and a more dramatic option of leaving the UN Climate Convention, which will take America out of the Paris Agreement in a year and out of all UN talks on climate change.
The Paris Agreement took us onto the right road, but it didn't go far enough or fast enough in order to solve the problem. So Trump pulling out of the Paris Agreement would slow down that process of getting up to speed and getting there fast enough to tackle the problem.
So what might happen? Well, China and other countries are forging ahead with wind power and other low-carbon technologies on a vast scale. China says it will stick to the Paris Agreement. And individual American states like California say they'll now turn to the Chinese president for leadership.
California will work with him and work with other countries to do everything we can to offset the negative pathway chosen by President Trump.
President Trump has pledged to revive the American coal industry, and it desperately wants him to leave the Paris Agreement. If he does, other countries that rely on coal may follow his example. But at the same time, solar power has tumbled in price. So whatever is decided in Washington tonight, the world may anyway be heading for a low-carbon future. David Shukman, BBC News.
And our North America correspondent Nick Bryant is at the White House. Nick, will international pressure make any difference to Donald Trump, or is this all about domestic politics?
George, Donald Trump has always made it very clear that America first means America first, even if that means America alone. Now, international leaders made their views very clear over the weekend at the G Summit in Sicily, and they weren't happy with Donald Trump's reply. The UN Secretary General made an impassioned plea during a speech on Tuesday in New York. But I wonder whether a voice that could cut through, that could influence him at this 11th hour, is actually found closer to home. And that voice belongs to his daughter, Ivanka Trump. She has been lobbying for months for her father to keep America in the Paris Accord. But as you say, the world will be watching this, but there's a big domestic audience too, not least the people who put Donald Trump in the White House. Many voters in the old industrial heartland of America, what we often call the Rust Belt, where the idea has taken strong hold that the Paris Accord is a jobs killer, and that view obviously was encouraged by Donald Trump. Does he want to anger them, or does he want to anger the rest of the world? In 2 hours' time, we'll find out.
Nick, thank you very much.
In just an hour and a half's time, Donald Trump will address the world from the White House Rose Garden to confirm whether or not he's pulling America out of the global climate change agreement. World leaders from Europe to China and beyond have been putting massive pressure on him not to abandon it. Up to now, President Trump has seemed ready to turn his back on the deal. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports.
Good morning. In or out? This is the day President Trump says he will finally reveal his decision on...
One of the most significant moments of his presidency, and Donald Trump is keeping America and the world in suspense.
You're going to find out very soon.
A decision on the planet's climate being treated in the style of a reality TV show. His past comments on global warming and extreme weather certainly suggest he's prepared to pull out of the Paris Agreement. Back in 2015, as the historic deal was being signed by 195 nations, Trump from afar was making this judgment.
I think it's a big scam for a lot of people to make a lot of money. In the meantime, China is eating our lunch.
Over the last week, some of America's closest allies have desperately tried to persuade the president not to walk away from the agreement. The Prime Minister reflecting on that today.
It was only at the G7 last week that I was making clear to President Trump, as were other leaders sitting around that table, the importance we attach to the Paris Agreement.
Meanwhile, the Chinese are seeing in America's ambivalence an opportunity to project themselves as the unlikely leaders in climate change science. While visiting Berlin, both the Chinese Premier and the German Chancellor committed themselves to adhering to the Paris Agreement. Also in Germany, another American politician was uploading on social media an apology for Trump's conduct.
Trump does not reflect the values of most Americans. Our job is to bring people around the world closer together.
What is clear is that underway within the White House is an epic factional battle. On one side are family members like Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, pushing the president to stay inside the Paris Accord. But advisors like the anti-globalist Steve Bannon are advocating for a dramatic break with Obama's climate change policies. It leaves the imminent decision on a knife edge. America's role as a global player at stake. The whole world watching and waiting, just as Donald Trump, the impulsive showman, likes it to be. Well, it's a remarkable commentary on the unpredictability of this White House's decision-making, that with less than 90 minutes to go, there is a sense it could go either way. Certainly, if Donald Trump pulls out of the Paris deal, it will cause dismay, even in some quarters, outrage around the world. It will also exacerbate very much divisions here within America, the scientific community, the foreign policy establishment. Certainly states like California and New York, as well as many corporate leaders, all urging this president to stay inside the agreement and embrace a future of clean energy.
Robert, thank you.
Now, will he or won't he? President Trump seems to love drama, especially a drama with him in the lead role. This time it's climate change. And as he prevaricates over the Paris Climate Accord, the rest of the world, bar Syria and Nicaragua, who've not signed up to it, are left wondering where that leaves the rest of us. It all feels like yet another seminal moment for the Trump presidency. Our correspondent, Kylie Morris, is in Washington. Kylie.
Matt, we're just learning of a briefing to staffers on Capitol Hill by the White House Energy Policy Advisor, in which he's reportedly told them, given them a confirmation that the United States is getting out of the Paris Agreement. Now, certainly it's not looking particularly good for the Remain camp, if I can. At this stage, there are a lot of climate skeptics who've been invited to this event in the Rose Garden, and the Leave campaigners are feeling very buoyant. Having said that, we don't know what this will look like. How hard an exit will he choose? Does he flip the agreement back to the Senate, get them to vote out? And that's kind of the nuclear option. Or does he play by the rules and start a reversal that takes 3 years? Now, there are also those still suggesting that the US could stay in the framework, but strip back all their other commitments. Certainly the president wants it to appear as though, just as he's done with immigration and with trade, now it's climate's turn, and he is resetting America's course in the most dramatic way imaginable. But there's another side to this. States with massive economies like California, the 6th largest economy in the world, bigger than France, it remains deeply committed to the Paris Agreement, and what Donald Trump decides here today is unlikely to change that.
The horizons appear to be shrinking for America's stake in the global future.
If the president walks away from the Paris Agreement, he takes the world's second biggest carbon emitter out of the deal done to fight climate change. And that imperils the grand bargain to keep the average rise in temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius. With so much at stake, no wonder the world's scientists are saying, stop, think.
Climate is bigger than just short-term reckoning of how much money goes here or there. It's an opportunity, Mr. President, to stay in the agreement and keep the United States a world leader. And if you don't believe me, ask your daughter. Your daughter is part of the future. Your grandkids are part of the future.
Perhaps the president will hear Bill Nye. After all, he's another TV host with a popular show in the US.
Save the world!
Or what about the heavenly hosts? The Pope himself gave the president some climate change reading when they met last week. Today, the Vatican declared if he withdraws from Paris, it will be a slap in the face and a disaster for everyone.
I'm hearing from a lot of people both ways.
The president has injected today's announcement with as much drama as a reality show finale.
I'm hearing from a lot of people. Both ways. Both ways, believe me.
Rivals competing for his attentions, still making up his mind yesterday and then tweeting the date and location of the big reveal, the Rose Garden, 3 p.m. Don't miss it. Old allies fear a widening schism as dramatic as the huge slab of ice that was filmed this week, threatening to crack and float away from one of Antarctica's largest ice shelves. Transatlantic relationships at breaking point too. This, the European Commissioner, on the president's likely decision. He says it wouldn't be good for the world or the US if America abandoned the agreement, and that the vacuum would likely be filled by China. Indeed, the Chinese are there already. Prime Minister joining Angela Merkel in Berlin to pledge their continued commitment to fighting climate change. But there are indications lobbying by G7 leaders at their summit last week had the opposite effect on President Trump to what they intended. A prominent climate skeptic who worked on the president's transition team says those lobbying to stay in the deal forced the president to delay his decision until he'd heard from them.
With the hope that the other leaders would lean on and persuade President Trump to stay in Paris. Clearly that hasn't worked. I think he reacted badly to the way the pressure was applied to him.
How am I doing?
The last time President Trump invited his friends to the Rose Garden, they were there to gloat over their legislative undoing of Obamacare.
Thank you all very much,
if he withdraws from Paris shortly, they'll be there again to celebrate another reversal of history.
Kylie Morris in Washington. Well, I'm now joined from Santiago in Chile by the former UN Climate Change Secretary, Christiana Figueres, who was one of the driving forces behind the 2015 Paris Agreement. Welcome to the program, Christiana Figueres. Now, let me start off with this question. You have been described by one of your former aides.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, you've been described by one of your former aides as a mini volcano. Now, will you erupt if Donald Trump, as we are led to believe, decides to pull out of the Paris Agreement?
Well, first of all, what we have been witnessing over the past weeks and months, I would actually put into the category of a vacuous political melodrama, because the fact is that the United States currently, today, has no legal basis to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. The United States government will have a legal basis to withdraw on the 5th of November of the year 2019. As of that date, but certainly not before. So anything that we hear before is actually more as a political intention, but certainly does not have any legal basis. What is perhaps most interesting is that this political melodrama has actually galvanized a huge groundswell, not just of support, but of actually even deepening commitment to the goals of the Paris Agreement. Just in the past 24 hours, we have heard that the EU, the European Union, and China will tomorrow release a long statement of their leaders on how they are actually not just going to ensure but enhance the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And just a few hours ago, we heard also from Russia their support for the Paris Agreement.
All right, but if the United States, whatever the timing on this is, as the world's biggest industrial power, withdraws from the Paris Agreement, that will be very damaging for your cause, for many people's cause.
Well, that would be the case if a political withdrawal or even a legal withdrawal would actually stop all of the action that is always in the United States. But that is not the case. The fact is that all of the corporations, 760 and counting corporations, that have asked the Trump presidency to not withdraw from the Paris Agreement, to stay in the agreement, to stay the course of decarbonization, plus all of the states, plus 130 cities that are completely convinced of the benefit to their economy of doing climate action, they will all continue to move forward. So the fact is, even if the White House steps aside, the U.S. economy will continue to decarbonize.
So are you saying that this is a lot of political hot air from Donald Trump?
I guess that, yes, I guess that would be a nice summary.
Okay, and just one brief one. Do we now see China stepping into a vacuum, into a position that has been vacated by the United States?
Yes, and I think that is the sad part for the U.S. Because the fact is that the Chinese government and the Chinese economy are very, very clear about the fact that, A, they have to do this because they want to improve their public health conditions, but also because they see this as their competitive edge into the next few decades of this century. They understand that this is unstoppable, that the decarbonization of the global economy is irrevocable, and they want to be competitive. So they want to be there. And yes, the vacuum, the political vacuum that will be left by the United States government is certainly already being filled in by China, by the EU, and by other governments.
Okay, got to leave it there. Christiana Figueres, thank you very much indeed. Back to one of our main stories tonight. Donald Trump's expected announcement that the US will pull out of the Paris climate change agreement. Kylie Morris is now inside the Rose Garden at the White House. Kylie, what's up?
Now we're just hearing about this major announcement and what the details are likely to be. We're now told that Mr. Trump, that President Trump, will be talking about the climate change accord being a bad deal for America. He'll be reminding everyone that this is him keeping his campaign promise about putting America back to work and really emphasising job creation. If I could just show you something quite surreal. We've got a jazz band in uniform playing here to set the mood. I think Donald Trump is trying to throw himself a party here and remind everyone that this is his victory, that this is a victory for his supporters. It's an issue they cared about, and he has delivered. At the same time, there will be many who will be horrified by this decision, not only those who worked so hard on building the accord, but also those concerned about their international alliances.
Thanks, Kylie. The discourse of jazz in the Rose Garden.
I've been getting away with it all